Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Chris, and this is Business by the Books.
Welcome to Business by the Books, where we believe that leaders are readers. So if you are not reading, you are not leading. This is episode 15, and the book that we are covering today is Managing the Professional Service Firm by David H. Maister, and it was published in 1993, and this looks like you've had this book for a while. So
It's very earmarked.
yes.
Lots of yellow, couple of little tabs there.
Sweet. So I'm assuming that most of this book is talking about managing specifically in the service firm industry.
Right,
So
right. Which
kind
is pretty much the world I'm in.
yeah, exactly.
Right?
A lot of what you do. So kind of what is the gist of this book?
So let's talk a little bit about what is a service firm. This message will mean a lot to those who are in a service firm. So a professional service firm would be lawyers, could be accountants, could be an architectural firm, could be an engineering consulting firm, it could be a management consulting firm. So typically the professional is someone who has an area of expertise, and they make their money by basically trading time for dollars.
Okay, cool, sweet. So within this, the book is talking specifically about how you operate a business as a
Yeah, it's
service
kind of holistic, and Ashley and I laugh because I'm like, oh, this is one of my favorite books, and so the problem is when you got 50 books and they're all your favorite book. Well, which one's really your favorite? In terms of structuring a professional service firm, by far, this is the very best book that was ever written because it talks about everything. It talks about everything from going to get business, how you motivate employees' compensation, how you manage partners. And so kind of in this series, we're going to talk about, really how is a professional service firm set up. So you have senior people and then you have junior people. And he just does a great job building a structure. And it's great for a startup like we are, but it's also good for organizations that have been around for 25, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 years to help manage the overall process of managing a consulting firm.
Yeah, so you mentioned that he kind of goes through the structure of what a service firm looks like. So how
Right.
does he break that? I mean, I just don't know anything about this particular
Yeah.
world.
Yep.
Not my thing. So kind of how does he break all of this
So there's a
down?
couple things, and I like little pithy things that help me remember it. So one of the things he talks about is finders, minders, and grinders. Okay, and so a finder would be someone that goes out and gets the work, and so typically that's going to be a senior person. They've got relationships and they've got clients, and so there's a certain expectation that they bring the work in. So it's kind of like in fishing; they're the one that catches the fish. And then the minder is the manager, is kind of the manager of the work. So the senior partner or the partner would go out and get the work, and then they have a group of managers underneath them. They really make sure the work is done. And then you have the grinders, which are the young people. So, for example, like when you graduate from A&M and you get your first job, you're a grinder, right?
Yep.
That you're not expected to go out and get the work, but you're expected to be able to do the work. So you have finders, minders, and grinders, and they're all super important. And what you really want is, I'm using my hands here, but you kind of want a pyramid, right? So that you have some kind of partner at the top, and he's a person who he or she, they own part of the company. And so there's a responsibility that they have that within their triangle, that all the people that they're responsible for keeping them busy, responsible for managing the welfare of that group. And so when you have a really large firm, maybe you have like a law firm with 1,000 people, not everybody's a partner, but not everybody's a grinder. So you have finders, minders, and grinders. So it's very important that early on you identify the grinders who you want to kind of grow up in your system. And he talks about that as well.
Okay.
So he kind of builds a hierarchy, if you will.
Sweet, awesome. So as far as the hierarchy goes, functionality wise, and I know this is already getting into application, but within your own company, do you have a relatively well-balanced pyramid within your own company?
Well, kind of because we don't have a lot of staff.
people,
We're relatively
yeah.
small. We're kind of set up this way, is that I'd be the managing partner / president, and so I'm primarily responsible for going out and getting work. And then I have a couple of minders, and they're able to grind. I mean, even I have to grind sometimes. I'm working on reports and running calculations. But we do have that, and then we have some younger staff, and probably that's the area that we have to build out. And so it's very important that you don't get too narrow, but that you don't want to get too wide either. There's a right balance. So we're not quite there, but a book like this helps set a framework for what it's supposed to look like.
Cool, sweet. So you want to go ahead and talk about your favorite parts of the book and all that?
Yeah, so Finders, Minders, and Grinders was another one. Another one was the type of projects. And so he had 3 categories of projects. He had brains, gray hair, and procedural. So let's kind of walk through those. And let's start with procedural. So a procedural project would be something that maybe you've done hundreds of these. And so, you get the call, and like, for example, in our world, it would maybe be burst testing, right? So you get pipe, you put end caps on it, put a couple strain gauges, and you blow it up. It's not a $1 million project, so to speak. But you can do a lot of them, and it's relatively easy to do.
Routine.
It's very routine. That's a better word. And so that's kind of a procedural. A gray hair project, and as one who has a little bit of gray hair, more than I want to admit, is the gray hair is primarily a function of experience. That you've done a bunch of these before, and it's not quite procedural. It still requires a little bit of a thought process, and those projects are super important. And then you have the brain projects, and fortunately or unfortunately, most of the work that we do is brain, and so it's just exhausting. You're always having to think about, well, what does this mean, and what does this mean? In general, from a professional service firm, you need experienced people who are very educated in order to do the brain project. So I like brain projects. I don't like procedural projects, but I realize in any organization, if you're efficient and you're doing things economically, things that were once brain projects, you push them down, and then you can get the younger staff that would do those.
Yeah, well, because I would assume that the brain projects are the projects that are kind of on the edge of cutting technology and innovation.
Exactly. Yep.
And so, as with any innovation, the more that you do it, the less it becomes innovative.
Right,
so
right.
We
talked about, I guess, in our last podcast about innovation, and the problem is if you're not constantly innovating, other people are competing with you, and they're watching what you're doing. And so something that's a gray hair is going to be a procedural for them, and they're going to beat you on economics all day long. And so that's why it's very important in business that you're always looking for new opportunities, you're always reading books, and you're looking for trends in industry so that you can, in some regards, Ashley, is that the cost of doing brains projects is much higher than the procedural projects, but those projects don't come along as often. You have to, sometimes those projects may take a couple of years in order to sell those, whereas a procedural project can be a phone call.
Yeah. So with the brain projects, those tend to have a higher risk, but also a much higher reward.
Exactly.
In the long run.
Yeah. You can make a lot of money. You can also lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of risk reward.
Yeah. Well, fun things. Other thoughts on this book that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, so one of the other things is when you manage professionals, professionals go into certain disciplines to make money, right? It's like, hey, if you're going to go do this and you go get advanced degrees, and it's not all about the money, but once a firm starts growing and people start making money, that becomes a driver. And so one of the things that he did, and I'm going to read from the book, and I tagged it here with my little blue sticky. So he talks about the seniority system. So it's on page 257. And so the concept here is how you reward people. And so a seniority system says, well, you've been at the firm for 30 years, and we're going to reward you because you've been here for a long time. And then maybe you have a young person who's been there for 12 years, and they're a mover and a shaker, and they're bringing a lot of work. But the problem is if you reward based on seniority, the person who's bringing in maybe 5 times what the senior person is, they can't get rewarded. Yeah. So that kind of sets the context. So let me read to you what he said. While this may be the most visible problem of the seniority system, it is not the most important. Far more significant in my experience is the fact that the system fails to recognize and reward differences in performance among partners of equivalent tenure at all levels, and thus creates an environment that can be extremely discouraging to a number of partners. Why, they ask, should I strive for outstanding performance when such efforts are neither rewarded nor even acknowledged? Such reactions are particularly likely in firms in which, because departures from the seniority system are avoided, poor performance is not confronted. So that is huge. And so, companies that have been very, very successful, and they kind of rest on that, it's easy to get a little bit lackadaisical and not manage that part of the business.
Yeah, it cripples the motivation of
it does.
people who actually care.
Well, and it's a little bit why probably, communism doesn't work in a sense.
I was going to say, it sounds very much like a socialist
it's not, well, it's not so much socialism, I guess it could be, but to me in some regards it's communism versus capitalism. That, communism is like, everybody's doing it for the betterment of the group, and you do your part and you contribute it, and if you do a little bit more, then you're just doing it to help everybody else out.
Yeah.
And the problem is human beings, it just doesn't work, right? People just quit, and I've had several friends of mine who went into Russia as missionaries, and they just, and this has probably been 25 years ago, but they said there's the concept of capitalism is just so foreign that they, starting companies, there's no desire to do it because their point is, why would I want to make a lot of money when I don't get to keep it? Versus in capitalism, there's this constant tension is if people are doing a really good job and you reward them and all those kind of things, I mean, that's a primary driver and everybody benefits in that. And it's the same way in a company is if you have a couple of top performers and they're the ones who make most of the money, but they're the ones who are bringing most of the money in, you just have to deal with that. And if people in the firm aren't happy about it, well, the solution is go out and get more work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, and it's this concept of, well, in a perfect capitalist society, it's this idea that all hard work meets reward and meets motivation. And so I think as somebody who owns your own company and someone who is at the top, ensuring that hard work is rewarded because you're able to see it and you're able to pick it out and you have the power to control the motivation and the reward.
And one of the things that's interesting, and he talks about this a little bit, but I'll pull off on a rabbit trail, is a lot of times, going back to our 5 voices, is professionals who are really good at what they do. My guess is a certain percentage of those are guardians, right? And they're good at what they do. They're good at running numbers, really thinking logically, and it's super important in every organization that you have people like that. But the challenge is that a lot of professionals are probably uncomfortable selling, and we've talked about that through these series of podcasts. And so that's something that you have to overcome, and you have to build a culture where people are encouraged to go out and get work. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to me, though, is that you don't have to be a salesperson to get work. And I know one gentleman that I worked with 25 years ago, he was extremely good technically. And so if he worked with someone, a client, they loved working with him because they knew that he was going to be responsive. They knew he was going to do good work. So he never had to go out and publish papers and go to conferences and those kind of things just because he did such a good job. But then someone else may really want to do that. And so you just need to build structure in your firm, but you have to reward people who bring the business. And one of the things I wrote down, Ashley, it said, as crazy as it sounds, success is the number one reason companies fail. And it sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is really ironic.
Is that what happens is companies and individuals get comfortable, and you're always going to have competition. And we've mentioned Andy Grove, who was one of the kind of founders of Intel, and he wrote a book, and his mantra was only the paranoid survive. And so you always have to be thinking about, am I doing the best that I can, and what are the next advances that I can do?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I keep going back to episode 3, Unleashing the Innovators, and constantly moving forward and not looking back. And it's Meet the Robinsons, I guess, is that quote?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, just keep moving forward. And that's actually a Walt Disney quote, too. So it's this concept of, in everything, you have to keep moving forward. You have to be on top of it. But I love this idea of making sure that success is rewarded and is not a blinder more than anything. Right. So that's really cool.
Yeah, one of the other things that he talks about is having a metric for performance. And let me just ask you, I mean, we've talked about it a lot through these as well as just kind of throughout your life. What's the biggest metric of the success of a business?
Return on investment.
Exactly,
money.
profitability.
Yeah.
And so you need to have a system that rewards profitability. In other words, if someone goes out and brings in $3 million a year, but their profitability is 5%, okay, and then someone else brings in, maybe $2 million, but their profitability is 40%. you've got to have some kind of metric that does it. And I'll admit, kind of in our company early on, because we've spent a lot of capital building things, that it's a challenge. It's like, okay, so if you have a certain amount of profitability, but some percentage of that you're reinvesting back in the company, getting equipment, forklifts, and buying instrumentation, the first couple of years you have to be kind of very balanced. And that's why I'm glad I'm doing this firm at roughly 50 years old instead of 25 years old, because at 25 years old I'd be freaking out. But when you get older, you have a longer term perspective. And it's like, okay, maybe we don't make as much money the first couple of years, but we're building a foundation. Kind of like when you and Matt get married. The first couple of years, you're just building a foundation for a family, so that after you've been married for 30 years, because you built a very solid foundation, things just tend to work right.
Yeah.
So, as I said, I love this book. I think it's probably not meant for everyone, but if you're going to work in a professional service firm, and if you're thinking about starting a consulting firm, I mean, I probably haven't given as many of this book away because it's a super thick, real deep book, but I've probably given 20 over the past 15 years away. And at one point, the group I was managing, we actually used it for our retreat. We didn't read the whole thing, but I think we read like the first 3 chapters. Yeah. So it's a good read. It's the kind of book, I get it out at least once a year and just kind of go through things. And probably, preparing for this podcast at Reinforce, I probably need to reread it again, because it's got a lot of good fundamental things in there.
Yeah. Well, any other final applications? I know we kind of already talked about the application to your company specifically, but any other thoughts on this book and how it can apply to somebody else?
Yeah, one of the things I kind of thought about was on page 159, he said, a firm should be constantly seeking to increase its understanding of client industries, to improve service, and to add to its technical capabilities. And so what I wrote is, we must always be seeking to improve. And I think that becomes a culture thing, right? It's kind of like a football team. It's like, think about Alabama and how dominant they were for years. And Nick Saban, there was something he had a system. Now he hasn't done as well the past couple of years, but you can't discount for a decade plus the dominance that Alabama football had. But he was always seeking to improve, and the players that came into his system, there was an expectation of performance. I mean, when the guys that were there the year before, and you're a freshman, you come in and they were national champions, the bar is super high. And so that's why, going back to this pyramid concept, the senior people need to set a culture that they're always working and always striving. And, consulting is it's difficult. And I know, everybody who's listening to this, you have different jobs, but consulting it's a 24-hour-a-day deal. I mean, your mom and I often laughed, I'm a doctor, but not the kind that can help people, okay? But I'm always thinking about clients and how I can help them. And if they're struggling with something, I'm emotionally with them. And if we can't figure things out, so it's consulting's not meant for everyone, because you have to be good technically, but you also have to be able to connect with people and grow the work. And I think we probably talked about this a little bit. To be good in consulting, you need to be good at 3 things. You need to be strong technically. You need to be able to manage people, because you can't do everything. And kind of for the first year and a half, I worked all the time, and I was kind of that person. It's a lot more fun now to have the group that we have working on projects. And then the last thing is, you got to go out and get work. And so at least I do, and I think probably the senior guys in the firm, we think about how much work we've got now, what does it look like 3-6 months, and so if we're looking 6 months out and we don't have as much work, we need to be thinking today and be proactive. So it's an exhausting career, but I was kind of wired for it, and your mother's been super tolerant because I have to work a lot, and you guys have too. I mean, it's like, I look at how we've been blessed as a family, but there's a price to pay, and you spend a lot of time working, and it's, I wouldn't trade it, but I don't think I realized how hard it was going to be when I started 30 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Well, and in the midst of you getting kind of a break right now with COVID, because you're not traveling, and normally you're traveling all the time. So,
Although I'll admit I miss it.
Yeah.
Because, I've got a couple of clients I just love. I have a group in Calgary that I go see, and it's like, I love going to Calgary. I've got my routine. I stay at the Hyatt. And I get there the first night, I check in, and I love to run, and I go on the treadmill. It's up on the top floor, and I go up there, and a lot of times the first night I'll just run for an hour, and then I go back and I do room service, and then I'm pumped because the next day I get to go see my buds. And so I've really missed that. And so this is the longest span I've ever had probably in your lifetime of not traveling, because I've always traveled at least once a month and usually a couple of times a month. But so the fun part going back to this book is I'm a finder. I like to go out and get to work. And so it's, I'm a little bit over it, but probably like 6 weeks ago, I was kind of depressed because I couldn't go see people. And I'm like, it's just it's a period of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We'll see how long this lasts. Yeah, no, it'll be good. And we can all go out and you can resume your finding position. I'll just continue to grind. I'm still a grinder no matter what, so it's fine.
Yep.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Feel free to reach out to us if you end up reading this book or any of the other books that we talk about in our other episodes. You can reach out to us at businessbythebookspodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, businessbythebooks.com. And then we are also on Instagram, and that is Business by the Books. So just look up Business by the Books on anything.
You can find us.
You'll find us. Yeah, you got it. We trust you guys. But yes, you want to close us out?
I do. Leaders are readers, and if you're not reading, you're not leading.
Sweet. Thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.